So we have with us today, very, very lucky to be joined by a number of people with different perspectives, indeed expertise, on neurodivergent youth and on supporting neurodivergent people in a variety of different contexts, from professional careers to community work to build community building and all that. I will let them introduce themselves in a moment because they're better at it than me. And I just wanted to kind of set a frame for the discussion because I'm not sure how much every single individual person knows in the room. I'll keep it short as I can. So we obviously will dispute the term therapy in all these because they are not beneficial or helpful or at the will and preference and guided by the person being subjected to them. But just because that's the term people are familiar with, we will talk about conversion therapy and other therapies, although we reserve the right to dispute that term. So conversion therapy, usually when just said as conversion therapy, is the forced practice. It can be by religious, by clinical, or by any other means to change a person's gender identity or sexual orientation, or their expression of that. It has, unfortunately, a long and not very great history, and it is still very much in practice in Ireland today. It is extremely common. I can't find the figures for Ireland. There is currently a survey being launched, and I would encourage everyone to really share that and promote it and put it out there, because a lot of people will never tell you they've experienced it, but you know people who have been subjected to it, and this is being used to show the case to push for a legal ban. So it's really important that whoever can shows that this is a problem and it needs to be addressed. And then obviously we will also use that ban to push for a further ban of other things which we shall discuss. Yeah, so it's just very important people to know, because a lot of people don't realise that LGBTQIA conversion therapy is very much practiced here. It's very much alive. It is not just a religious thing, it's very common in clinical practices, and Ireland is actually, in a recent international report, being flagged as a high-risk country for that. And this is important for all of us, one, not just because most of us give a damn about people, but also because for the autistic community, 69.7% are members of the LGBTQIA plus community as well. We don't have figures for other neurodivergencies because it's all about how to cure us. But indications are, I don't know, anecdotally me, most of my MD friends are also queer in some way. So it's a very entangled and near and dear to us. So I'll stop talking now and I'll pass over to the panel. And I'm just going to ask Gillian to come in to kind of explain why I have not introduced Gillian, which I absolutely am not going to forget. So Gillian, for full disclosure, is my sibling and is a co-founder of Neuro Pride with a background in early childhood development and in supporting people who have been abused in various ways, a number of different expertises in the area, and they're great and they have great hair. So I am going to stop talking now because I am making an awful mess of it, and I'm just going to ask Gillian to kind of, for the topic title, which is the Entwined History of Conversion Therapy and Autism, to just kind of explain a bit more about why we picked that topic.
Well, you kind of covered it yourself when you said about the fact that so many of us are neurodivergent and queer. And the reason we picked this topic was obviously because this is part of Dublin Pride, and we wanted to bring attention to the fact that these topics are very closely aligned, especially considering everything that's been happening recently with the trans community and stuff like that. I think I know you said 67.9, or I'm not good with numbers.
Just under 7.
Yeah. And actually, that figure actually increases when you talk about the trans community. An awful lot of, especially autistic people, identify as trans, or are trans, sorry. So we felt this was a really important opportunity for us to highlight something that is vitally important to our community. The reason we are talking about conversion therapy is obviously we're talking about conversion therapies like ABA, positive behaviour support, Denver Early Start Denver model. These are all radical behaviourist interventions used on autistic and more increasingly other neurodivergent young people and adults to do exactly what gay conversion therapy wants to do, to change the inherent way that we interact in our and the world. Why we feel it's important is that not an awful lot of people, some people do, not an awful lot of people, they can see the similarities. They don't necessarily know of the history, that they pretty much were made by the same person. The man who was behind ABA, which is Applied Behavioural Analysis, was a man called Ole Ivor Lovas. He then took the principles that he developed on autistic children and brought them to work on the Feminine Boy Project, which is where gay conversion therapy sprang from. So that's the reason that we picked this topic, because it's not just that they're kind of similar, they're very, very much aligned and very, very much important to our whole community.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Just get that kind of bit more depth. Sorry, so I am very, very, very sorry about this. I have no brain for names, so I keep forgetting who's talking about what. So I'm just kind of, Mackie, if you don't mind introducing yourself and kind of expanding on that.
I'm Mackie. I've done student support generally backwards and forwards at just about every level, from primary up to college level, for various neurodivergent students. I know, I tried to work it out there one time. It's a long time, good 20 years anyway at least. Primarily what I do is theory, so I do a lot of very, very boring, long, detailed, convoluted theoretical discussions of exactly what's the nuance behind the meaning of this word in this particular context. Tedious stuff. But I also do training and webinars, that kind of things as well.
Yeah. So like, when it comes to the history of behavioural interventionist practices, kind of use a group name for all things like ABA and PBS and stuff, like what has been the history behind that to kind of bring us where we are today? And
I
how
think
prevalent are these now?
the biggest thing to appreciate about the background to all of this is that during the course of the 20th century, the whole idea of psychology and behaviourism within that was just, they essentially were making this stuff, trying to work out what is this? Does it make sense? Does it have a use? Is it relevant? How can we apply this? And there's an awful lot of stuff, if you go back through the history of ideas and theories, that have just disappeared because they said, oh, maybe this will work, and it kind of didn't, so they just forgot it. Within the mix of that is a particular guy by the name of B.F. Skinner, whose behaviours, who had a particular approach on all of this, which he called radical behaviourism. And that essentially is the heart and soul of where conversion therapy has come from. Now, you've got to bear in mind that this was happening at the same time that it was totally cool to sterilise disabled people and people with mental health issues, because, you know, for their own good, you know. But also things like lobotomy, and, well, maybe if we kind of like run electric current through this person, it'll fix them and stuff like that. So this is the kind of context in which radical behaviourism came to the table, and it was like, well, you know, let's treat them with a bit of respect, and we'll try and help them modify their behaviour. This is so much more civilised. But yeah, actually carving a piece of somebody's brain off, yeah, but I mean, you know, it's a low bar. But that, you've got to bear in mind, is the starting point where we're coming from, and the credibility of a lot of what came out of that came about because of that low bar, and it's only because of Lovas, who Gillian's already mentioned, that this got shifted beyond what Skinner liked. Skinner wasn't happy with what he did with it, and turned it into something completely different. It's like taking something that has some plausibility and you just kind of say, oh, let's just go way out to the edge here, climb over the wall and run across the fields with it. And everyone's going, look, hold on. But he did, and the environment in which he was able to do that in the US at the time gave him free rein to do some pretty appalling things, which you can read about. I'm going to go into the details.
I'm just going to ask Kate as well to come into this. So there were a couple of things Katie, sorry. Kate and Katie. I'm definitely going to get this confused all the time.
Easily done.
There's 4 people in the entire country, you're guaranteed to get 2 Kates at the same time.
Yeah, so, and I also just want to explain, I meant to do at the start, so because we're all neurodivergent and have different language processing and blah, 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 we have notebooks just we want to jot down ideas about what other people are saying. We are listening, we are being respectful of each other, it's grand. So Katie, who I definitely will not get your name wrong again, I was just interested in having your perspective. Katie also has a kind of professional perspective on this, so would you mind kind of just introducing yourself and then...
Absolutely. So, hello, I'm Katie Kerley. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been an occupational therapist for 13 years now, and I did my postgrad certificate in sensory processing 12 years ago, and that has become a very massive special interest for me and has remained kind of core to my practice to this day. I'm neurodivergent myself, multiply neurodivergent, so I'm autistic, ADHD and dyspraxic. So I got a heavy whack of the neurodivergent stick 3 times, and I'm pretty pleased about it. I'm also the clinical director of Horizons Therapy Services, which is a neuroaffirmative clinic in Dundalk. We are speech and language therapists, occupational therapists and clinical psychology. We work mostly with neurodivergent people, and our aim really is to help people be the most real and authentic version of themselves. So obviously anything that involves any form of conversion or masking is completely against our ethos. So some of what Mackie was saying there is obviously stuff that I would have studied when I was a student, so we would have kind of covered a lot of developmental psychology, and that's still relevant to my practice today, but obviously you got to pick and choose the bits that really help people rather than the bits that harm people. And Mackie mentioned B.F. Skinner, so a lot of B.F. Skinner's work was around operant conditioning, which was to reward behaviours that were considered positive and punish behaviours that were considered negative. Most of his work was done on rats and pigeons, so that's good to keep in mind. So, like Mackie kind of alluded to, Skinner was not very pleased with what Ivor Lovaas did with the theory after that. And furthermore, as someone who's interested in child development, it kind of goes against the whole theory of how humans really develop. We're actually quite dynamic learners, and especially neurodivergent people, we don't typically fit in the box of how education or how teaching approaches people. I mean, I don't think a lot of people do personally, but that's another story. So for a lot of us, learning and understanding of the world around us is a dynamic, interactive process. We explore, we do things, we test them out, we see how things go, and that kind of is a very natural process, and it happens for most humans. It doesn't happen at the same rate for everybody, and people kind of enjoy things more. But the whole theory that Lovaas had was that you could basically train people to behave in a certain way, and the other thing that Skinner kind of had was that psychology should focus on behaviours, and they didn't dig too much into why behaviours existed. And I think a lot of people who understand how humans operate, we know behaviours are there for reasons. People don't behave a way, they behave just for the hell of it. Behaviour is communication, behaviour means something. So if something looks different, there's likely a reason for it, and often the reason might be completely harmless. Like one of the things that ABA historically has done has tried to kind of train stimming behaviours out of autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people. Like, we know all humans stim, and us neurodivergents, we just do it in more flamboyant ways maybe, but stimming is not harmful. It doesn't harm the person stimming most of the time, like, and I'm saying 99% of the time it's not harmful. Nor does it harm the people around them. So it's important that we don't look at these things as behaviours to be stamped out. Like, for me, I stim when I'm happy. Stimming is very much an expression of joy for me. I also stim when I'm nervous. Like, I stim all the time, really, like, let's be real. So if someone tried to decrease my stimming, I would have a pretty bad life. So I think that's what we're trying to get at today, is the fact that this is harmful because this disrupts people's development of their own sense of self, and that's why we have such an issue with it. I talked a lot, I'm sorry.
Excellent. That's literally what you're here for. So, kind of given that this, like, behaviourism, this idea that we're almost like robots and it's just input in, behaviour out, there's kind of nothing more to us, given that Lovas's fairly horrific views on, like, for example, that autistic people aren't people, they just look like people.
You have the shell of a person, is what he said.
Yeah.
You
The
have
raw
to make-
materials.
You have to build the raw materials, and you have to build it yourself. And he also said lovely things like, once you hit a child, they're yours. You have a bond.
All right, winner.
Yeah, he used electric shock therapy, he electrified the floor, he advocated you have to hit a child and make them think that you're going to kill them, is one thing that he said. So as I said, he practiced this on autistic people and then went, oh, do you know what, who else I can practice this on, and took it to the LGBTQI community. And that's what's so important, because you mentioned stim suppression and stuff like that. And like new ABA and new autistic conversion therapy will say, oh, but we don't stop that. We don't stop them stimming anymore. We don't do this, and blah, blah, blah. That's not what's abusive. What's abusive about these therapies is that you are trying to change what somebody is. You are telling them that who they are, who they inherently are, is wrong. That everything about them is wrong. Everything about the way they interact with the world is wrong. As you can hear, exactly what is said to LGBTQI plus people. And that is where the abusive. It doesn't matter if you think, well, I'm a nice person, I'm not doing that. If you are trying to train people to be something they are not, that's the abusive part. And it's really important that people get that, because it'll be, as I said, you heard me list out a lot of acronyms at the start. They will keep on trying to rebrand and make this better, and but this is new. We don't do that anymore. So when we're not electrocuting people, they still are in the Judge Rottenberg Centre, just by the way. But they will say, oh, well, this isn't, if this is different, we're not hitting them, so it can't be that abusive. What it is, like, I am an expert level masker. I started masking when I was 4 years of age, when I started school, because I realised, oh, who I am and the way I am isn't right. And so I self-ABA'd, if you want. And it has an enormous impact on you as you go through your life. The masking, the teaching of masking is what is abusive. And that's the thing we need to focus on. This is a human rights issue. It is as much a human rights issue as gay conversion therapy, and working together. I'm going to say both communities, but as we said, there's an enormous overlap. The entire community working together, hopefully we can push and make people understand that that's what the problem is. That it's not just, and the thing is, you're selling it to parents who are worried, that are scared, that are, and an awful lot of times, unrecognised neurodivergent themselves, and like, well, I really struggled. I don't want my child to struggle like I struggled, and they're saying this thing will help, therefore I'll do it. Like, so, and it's hard then if you have a lot of autistic adults coming to you and being like, oh no, that's abusive, because absolutely nobody wants to feel like they're abusing their child, so they'd be like, so there's a lot of pushback, and it's difficult. It's a difficult situation, but I just thought it was really important to point out that, well, suppressing stims and all that is wrong, and there is a move, and that's not what's the actual abusive part of it all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of just because I'm not sure how much every individual person has heard about this topic before, so just masking is just hiding your natural way of being. So hiding your stims, your flaps, your tics, whatever, just suppressing and putting on a mask, changing your communication styles. Basically anything that's hiding your neurodivergent traits to put on a neurotypical mask, which is highly encouraged for loads of different things. And I just wanted to kind of ask Kate to come in just on that idea. So like, there is, not everyone, but there is kind of a growing acceptance now that old ABA, like that it came from this horribly ableist and discriminatory place, that it was horrifically abusive, that it was, well, I don't know if they've even got that far, but that it wasn't great, and there's like loads of mounting evidence that that behavioural interventions, and particularly ABA, just because that's the one most studied, not that that's the only one that's harmful, it increases your likelihood of developing complex PTSD by more than 85%. It increases your chance of committing suicide after you've been through it. So for this, obviously, everywhere, new ABA and different and gentle, is that the case? Is there a big divide between this horrible old love us and now?
So first of all, I'm Kate,
Yes,
and I started my own YouTube channel where I spoke about the new ABA over there as well. It's called Not So Kate. And before I talk exclusively about new ABA, I have to draw the link between both old ABA and new ABA, and that's quite simply the three letters ABA, Applied Behavioural Analysis. And at the core of both old ABA, new ABA, the goal is exactly the same, and that's to change the autistic person's behaviour and to force an autistic child to behave like a neurotypical child, and to push this idea that an autistic child must fit in. And as you were saying as well, ABA tells an autistic child that something is wrong with them, and the way they are is wrong, and that they have to fit into what society believes is norm. ABA is compliance-based training, and this means that it's considered a success when the child complies with the therapist. Supporters of new ABA will argue that punishment isn't used, but autistic children will have toys, snacks and breaks withheld until they comply. Supporters will argue that new ABA uses rewards, but withholding something a child needs or wants is not a reward. Another thing is the length of time children have to spend in therapy. They're expected to complete 20 to 40 hours a week of therapy, and this is recommended by new ABA therapists. And I just think, imagine a child as young as 2 expected to complete a full-time job. I mean, I'm 24 and I wouldn't be able to complete a full-time job at this stage. And in a time when, play is so encouraged for children, when does an autistic child play? And on that note as well, parents are encouraged to continue the ABA methods outside of therapy in a child's play and daily activities. And that just makes you think, well, when do they get away from it? If it's in the home as well. And then, as you were saying earlier as well, the link between the use of ABA in children and symptoms of PTSD. The study showed that almost half of people who experience ABA suffer from PTSD later in life. And during my research, I found this particular quote, which I just felt had great relevance, and it's, part of trauma is a situation, an environment over which we have no control. And I just felt that really applied to autistic children, having no control over whether they participate in ABA or not. During ABA, new ABA, autistic children are forced to make eye contact, suppress their stims, and pushed into uncomfortable sensory situations. And sensory sensitivities are real and painful for autistic children and adults. Touching on what some of the others said already about stimming, it is an autistic trait, and it's not something that's negative or should ever be suppressed. I know I've seen interviews with parents talking about stimming as if it's something that, we need to fix this. Like, that's a real, we need support to help fix stimming or something like that. But that's just autism. That's part of being autistic. And during my research kind of into this new ABA, I have seen videos of therapists, and these would be the new ABA therapists, holding down an autistic child's arms to prevent them from stimming. And as I said already, to prevent them from doing something that is part of being autistic. Something I thought about recently was, as a person who wasn't diagnosed until the age of 17, I often wondered what my childhood would have looked like had I been diagnosed. And I always thought that maybe I would have understood myself better and not pushed myself so hard to fit in. But now, on the other hand, I can't help but wonder if I would have been one of those children who went through 20 to 40 hours a week in therapy. I don't believe my mother would ever be pro-ABA, but when you're not presented with anything else, no alternatives, it's forcing parents' hand, really, yeah. And it makes me wonder what sort of childhood I would have had I been going through ABA.
And I think it's really interesting what you said, and I'd like to hear what the others think about it as well. That thing of just kind of the two sides of it. So, as I mentioned kind of at the start, and it's important to have that context, that unfortunately, queer conversion therapy very much still exists and very much still alive, and there are those, obviously, who are subjecting people to it and pushing people into it. But there is kind of a broader societal kind of thing of it is definitely a bad thing. It is not okay. And like you were saying, Kate, of how we thankfully, eventually, there is more and more recognition of how important it is for kids to be kids and to play. But so I'd really like to hear why you think there's this big exception for neurodivergent kids in particular and autistic kids in particular. Why is it okay for autistics when it's not okay for normal children?
Because we're not normal children. Wasn't that what what's her face said, Madigan? Sorry, Josina. I should be more respectful, I suppose. Josina Madigan mentioned last year the Dáil when somebody was challenging her on the reduction of errors and kids going back to school and lockdown and all that. She said, well, the normal children, and got pulled up in it thankfully. But
she's the Minister of Special Education.
Yeah, she's the Minister for Special Education, and she was like,
so she wouldn't be expected to have any expertise in
no,
this.
not at all. It would be ridiculous.
What are they saying about?
Yeah, nonsense, absolute nonsense. So I think that therein is like, it's that thing of, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that to them if I hadn't known they were autistic. It's like, or you could just treat all children as rights-bearing human beings, and then you wouldn't have this problem. There is that thing of, there's still that, well, you have to do this, because they won't grow up to be a productive and integrated member of society. Like, because their social communication is so bad and blah. Like, obviously, we've just sat here in silence the whole time, but we have no idea how to communicate with each other. And socialise in any way.
All that noise was a pre-recorded crowd.
Yeah. So, yeah, just any neurodivergent event and that whole has problems with socialising, we put in the bin. But that's the thing. Like, it's that idea that without this, we literally just all be sitting in the corner. Don't get me wrong. If that's your jam, if you just want to sit in the corner and sing, you fill your boots, like, absolutely. But there's that understanding that unless we do this, they won't be like everybody else, and that's a bad thing. So I think that's why it still prevails, because we live in a capitalist society, to be perfectly honest with you, and for an alternate, and that's part of it.
It's a mere coincidence that ABA made 17 million last year.
It's
They're just doing it at the goodness of their own hearts.
That's
Well,
exactly.
they've got to cover their costs.
So
salaries.
it's a huge industry as well, as you've just referred to now. It's a massive, massive, multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's only the figures that we have for America. And it's just prevalent, and they lobby, and they have a massive. There's links to the far right as well, obviously because of the gay conversion therapy. Not saying that everybody who subjects people to gay conversion therapy is on the far right. It's across society, but I think that's inherently what it is that we are seen as less than. We are seen as less than, and that's why it's okay to do this.
Can we cut the chase on this and just say the history of the way, particularly in, and I hate the word, but I'm going to use it with air quotes, Western society, the attitude towards social subgroups who are not directly easily associated with where the power lies. That power imbalance. If you're on the wrong end of a power imbalance, you're immediately vulnerable. But tied to that, and it's tangled through all sorts of ideas like the history of colonialism and all the rest of it, and nationalist ideas, and the idea of kind of national genius and all those questionable 19th century ideas that haven't managed to quite get rid of yet, is this idea that basically, unless you can actually be fully human, you don't really deserve, rights and stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, going back 2 generations in my family, I have a person who was put into an institution as a child and came out of that institution several decades later in a box. And the reason they were put in there was because they did not speak. They were prone to loud and aggressive outbursts, and they would spend a lot of their time moaning, slapping the floor and rocking backwards and forwards. Any of this sound vaguely familiar?
Although, not really, autism was only invented like in the
Oh yeah,
90s.
sorry, yeah, that's what that, yeah, well, analogous to, let's just say. When I heard that story, it took me weeks to get over it. Because I never met this person who was part of my family. And the reason that was okay was because they weren't human. To cut to the chase on it, they weren't human. As far as the authorities were concerned, because they are so far away from where the power lay, and they didn't tick enough human boxes to count, and that was okay. And the same goes when you go and lobotomize somebody. The same goes when you say, do this person, alcoholic parent, right? Well, what we'll do is we'll sterilize them to stop them from kind of passing on the bad genes.
And there's also that thing where that whole projection, I feel it is, where a lot of the justification is, but if we don't do this, they won't be accepted, which is a very sterilised way of going, we'll bully you, but it's your responsibility to change. I mean, we could just stop
Like
bullying
if you
you.
just changed, then we wouldn't have to bully you.
Yeah. And
The thing is though, when you get down to it, and you look at it, what is it though that people figure out what counts as a human? Usually, one of the first things that comes up is communicate with speech, right? And then mannerisms and social behaviour. In other words, you follow the social rules and you comply with norms and traditions and manners and all those kinds of things. And I mean, okay, they can make an argument for that in the 1930s. Not a great time for diversity and, individual expression, let's be honest. But times have changed, and that story has become harder and harder and harder to sell. And one of the problems with ABA is that it just seems to have not kind of accepted that. And there's already been mention of capitalism and kind of the capitalist society approach. The fact of the matter is, I'm just saying, there are billions and billions invested in this. And individuals, because it's not an industry that makes this happen, it's every single individual. Those individuals have invested their college studies and their sense of professional self-esteem and their source of income and their ability to pay the mortgage and the electricity bill and buy that extremely expensive tank full of fuel for the car. Those things are all now dependent on them continuing to do what they do. That's how they make the money that allows them to do the things, the ordinary things they need to do, like get the week shopping, is reliant on it. And this is where the trap comes in, that they become as much victims of the thing that they're doing, in a sense. The only difference is they've got the option to say, I'm going to retrain. And if you're a kid and you are terrified, and every person around you who you've been told is authority, everyone around you you've been told is the people you have to respect, look up to, emulate and trust, and they're all telling you, you're broken, you failed as a human being, and we're going to fix you. And the way to do that is you do what you're told.
I think that also...
You don't have that option.
Sorry, Matt.
To step away from it.
But I think that also ties in to, so they're like the concept of rights holders. So we are, I bet everyone here would be surprised that as a country, not just us around the globe, but just speaking in Ireland today, we are failing to meet the rights of many disabled people across the board, talking about autistic people, just to narrow it down for this discussion, on deinstitutionalisation, on access to alternatives, on supports, on access to education, on all these things. And I kind of wanted to ask Katie to kind of come in and talk about how, with this concentration on really harmful, really ableist behavioural interventions, also what are we missing? What alternatives that people actually need and want are they not getting? That's all over here.
Yeah, and I suppose I should also say, like, as a therapist, it is important for me to say that no autistic person needs therapy for being autistic. No gay or queer or LGBTQIA person needs therapy for inherently being who they are. So if your therapy or your child's therapy is pushing a direction that isn't actually in keeping with that person's authentic self, then it's harmful and it's a problem. And masking has been mentioned multiple times, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with Kieran Rose, the autistic advocate. He's a founding member of the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective. I highly recommend, if anyone's interested in neuroaffirming therapy, to check them out. Kieran Rose said a phrase at a webinar I was at once that made me cry my heart out, and that was, beneath the mask we slowly crumble and die. Because really masking is a mental health issue, and it leads to what we call the autistic red zone, which is a thing I really hate talking about, but the issue is that a lot of autistic people die younger than their neurotypical peers, and that's because of so many traumas that we experience over our lifespan. One of them being the fact that we are told, like Mackie said, you're not a person. And in this sense, ABA is here to sort of develop your personhood for you. You don't get to develop your own personhood, and that's a deep problem. So Mackie also mentioned communication being inherent to who, or to personhood. Communication, speech and language are not the same thing, and speech is one form of linguistic output. It's not the only form. So there is some people who support ABA saying that if you use ABA strategies, you're more likely to get a child to talk, but that's applying a neuronormative standard to a neurodivergent child and saying that speech is the only form of communication. So I may seem articulate right now, and there are times when I am, there are times when I'm not, but I am situationally mute. Some people might be surprised to hear that, but under severe stress, I cannot talk. And does that make me less of a person? I do not believe so. But a big thing that we push for is AAC. So that, for people who don't know, is augmented and assisted communication. So one thing that's important to note is that AAC can be used behaviourally, so it should not be. So people talk about PECS, which is Picture Exchange Communication System, being a behavioural intervention because it is a reward-based system. So PECS by itself is just a bunch of pictures. Pictures are just pictures. But when you implement it with the expectation that a child will request something and get a reward, then we have a problem. So what happens when you're teaching PECS through the PECS method is you start with food, because the child is hungry. So you give them a picture of food, and then they give you the picture, and you give them the food in exchange. It's trade. So it's kind of reducing communication to an exchange. Communication is a lot more than that. And also in that scenario, what happens is the child might be looking at the food. They might be pointing at the food. They might be touching the food. They might be making anything that implies that they're hungry. But until they give you that picture card, you don't give them the food. So you're rewarding one standard of communication that is not their preferred way of communicating. So AAC, core boards, all that sort of stuff, they can be used in a way that is behavioural, and that's important. It's really important to differentiate. So you want to take a total communication approach. If a child is using, say, a device or an adult to communicate, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Endeavour Corbin, highly recommend checking them out. They're on Twitter. Endeavour is a person who communicates with AAC, and I attended a webinar last year that Endeavour presented at for a full hour through an app called ProLocal to Go, and it was spectacular. So highly recommend checking out Endeavour on Twitter. But my point about communication is you need to have a total communication approach, because all humans are multimodal communicators. We don't just communicate with speech, we don't just communicate with a picture. So here I am waving my arms around, I'm excited. So, but you're all probably picking that up, you know. We do communicate in different ways, and it's important that all communication is honoured, all communication is respected, all communication is valid. So that's the communication aspect. So Nem asked me a little bit more about alternatives. So again, just to reiterate, no autistic person or no queer person needs therapy just for being themselves. But if there is therapy needed, occupational therapy, Obviously that's my discipline, so we are concerned with a thing called meaningful occupation, and meaningful occupation means that you get to choose what matters to you. Your therapist does not. So meaning is derived from yourself, not from what your therapist thinks. And I will just make a little caveat there and say there are OTs in Ireland who do ABA, and that really is against our code of ethics. There's been some recent research on the bioethics. So bioethics refers to whether it is good for a person's health and well-being and just human life in general, whether ABA actually meets the criteria of non-maleficence, which is first do no harm, and it does not meet those criteria. And this was a quite detailed study. Now there's some problematic language in the study. It's from 2020 and it's a psychology study, and I cannot remember for the life of me the name of the people who did it. I'm sorry, I do have it with me in my folder though. But my point about that is that when we start to apply neuronormative standards to neurodivergent people, we have a problem. So an occupational therapist who has your best interests at heart will help you be the person you want to be through the means that you want to do. So our job is to help you do the things that matter to you. So that's when I have sometimes got an issue in the clinic when people come in with children, and goals sometimes might be not exactly person-centered. And by person-centered I mean the child in this scenario. So sometimes I get a goal where a parent's like, I want the kid to write better, and the kid's like, I hate writing, I don't even want to look at a pen. So why would I even try that? So in that scenario, a big question when you're setting goals for therapy is why? Why does it matter? And does it matter at all? Those are the big things, and I think we often forget that. And I also would have to put my hands up and say, as a therapist, this required a lot of unlearning for me. I was taught person first language in college. I was taught that people needed to fit into boxes. Even though OT say that's not what we believe, we are taught that. We have to unlearn that, and it's a hard journey, but every therapist should do it. So I do believe that if your journey is being in any way dictated to you by somebody else, then it's not your journey anymore.
Okay. Could I come in there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm done.
No. I meant to
This is
mention
the butting inside over here.
I don't know the thing.
I'm really waiting for the fight to break out now.
Oh, I was going to no. Now, one of the things that I meant to mention earlier on and I didn't mention, one of the reasons that we are so concerned about this is to tie into what everybody else has said about teaching a child the way they are is wrong, teaching compliance, teaching. You are leaving them extraordinarily vulnerable to abuse.
Yeah.
You are leaving them vulnerable to grooming. You are teaching them that the way that they feel about something isn't okay. So if somebody is grooming them, that little gut feeling, that feeling that something's not okay, they're going to override that because they've been taught that adults are always in charge. That the most important thing that I can do as a young person is do what the adult has told me to do. So that's another aspect of radical behaviour therapies or autistic conversion therapies, is that you are leaving children vulnerable to later abuse. Not just about their mental health, not just about PTSD, which is very important, but also you are leaving them vulnerable to abuse because they have learned that the way they feel about absolutely everything, the way they feel about processing their experience of the world is inherently wrong. So they don't have a sense of self. You've taken away that sense of self, that sense of self-protection and self-preservation. So I think that's a really important thing to mention because I don't think people think about that as one of the dangers of ABA.
And it literally teaches children that adults are allowed to touch and control your body however they like, and you are wrong if you even complain about it. Never mind trying to stop it.
That's exactly it.
Again, like Kate was saying, we don't do this to other children. What the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
It leaves them vulnerable to predators.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that you were going to talk, sorry.
Yeah.
And
But
if they can't protect themselves, who's going to protect them as they even go into adulthood? If they've always had this idea that, as you said, the good feeling, it's almost like they can't think for the thought to not think for themselves, that the adult is going to tell them what to do and show them what to do, and it leaves them, I think, quite vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely. And we see that in the figures, but then it's put back on us. We know that why are autistic people so broken? Why do they have so many mental health? Why do they have such low self-esteem? Why do they experience so much abuse? What's wrong with them that
this is happening.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I, as you know, could sit here and chat to you all day, but we are coming up to 6 o'clock. We did start a little late, so I'm going to steal 5 minutes, because I just want to also kind of go, like, from here, things are pretty dire. The whole idea of forcing autistics to stare into people's eyeballs for no good reason, at the cost of their entire health and happiness being generally accepted by the vast majority of the population, is where we're at. Where do we want to go with all types of conversion therapy, LGBTQ, neurodivergent, all disabled, everyone? How do we get out of here?
I told you, burn it all.
I mentioned.
Well, apart from disagree with you there, because I am personally in favour of overturning buses and blocking streets and building barricades. So, you know, burning it
And then
all
burn it all
down, that's the second
I'd say there
step.
was the Neuro Pride submission to the Autism
Ideological
Committee
difference.
very closely, very nearly was just burn it all to the ground.
Yeah.
Decided to expand.
Can I just mention on a more serious note, like autonomy really is the big thing we haven't, we've talked about it but we haven't used the word. And autonomy is really what's missing here, is a person's ability to say, this is who I am, and this is what I want, and this is my life, and you don't get to decide that for me. And also, like, autistic people, our autonomy is often, like you said, overridden by people going, well, actually your sensory experiences are wrong, and your way you think about the whole world is wrong.
It's not that right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not that right. It's not that smelly. It's not that, you know, I didn't hit you that hard. That's another one. That's a fun one. So, yeah, so autonomy is a big thing, and I think what's so exciting is the increase of the neurodivergent and the LGBTQIA community's voices being present, and the internet's been a big contributor to that. I think it's certainly been a big shake-up for me as a clinician, but also as a person. It really opened my eyes to my own neurodivergence. But I think, like, obviously we have to make big systemic changes, but we also have to make small changes, and I know certainly an approach I often use is just to tackle individuals. Now, I know as an autistic person I'm liable to just, you know, tackle someone and info dump on them, but I have no qualms about doing that. This is a fairly common topic for me. So I think, like, you know, slowly breaking it down is one thing, but it's not happening fast enough, and as it's not happening, people are dying, and I think that's a big problem.
Well, I'm just going to emphasise, because we have been talking about conversion therapy, and Emily, you actually mentioned it, that, or actually, I don't know, you mentioned it, about almost 50% of people who've been through ABA experienced CPTSD after the event. That piece of research, I spoke to the person who did that research when it came out, and we had a long discussion around it. What was interesting about that research wasn't the fact that that was in there, it was the fact that the baseline from the autistic people who had none of that experience was still 4 times higher than it was for US Army veterans. And the people who had been through ABA and other forms of conversion therapy, autistic conversion therapy, was 4 times higher than the autistic baseline. So 4 times higher. You just get up in the morning as an autistic person, you're 4 times more likely than the next person to have PTSD. Put you through this therapy, 4 times higher again. Any medical process or anything along those lines, any sort of intervention or treatment anybody advocated, where you said, this has got nearly a 50% chance of doing harm and doing no good. You would not get that even close to the front door of an ethics committee, unless it was a last resort thing, in the case of something like terminal illness or something like that. It's like, we've nothing to lose.
Yeah, and I think
that's crucially important, because that's the normal thing, and it's ingrained into primary school techniques, it's ingrained into clinical practices, it's ingrained into the way the parents are told from day one that this is the best way to go about this. That damage is getting done on a daily basis. Yeah. We can't keep doing this to people. I'm screwed up. I don't know how many people here know me all that well, but I'm screwed up, you know. I drove from home to Kilkenny to come here, and then take a bus. I had to stop twice on the drive up to Kilkenny, which is like less than an hour, because I was listening to something on the radio. Somebody was talking about their experiences as a trans person, and it was just overwhelming because the triggers were just going off left, right, and centre. I can't drive like that. Sorry.
And I was just going to say that's the core kind of thing. It's the dehumanization all the way along. Like this dehumanization of your enemies has been going on for as long as countries have been invading other countries. The English did about the Irish, said we all had devil's hooves and tails. And in order to treat people, but in order to treat people like this, you have to first dehumanize them. Whether they're trans, whether they're intersex, whether they're non-binary, whether they're autistic, ADHD, everything. You have to dehumanize them, because then you can treat them different. We have been othered, and that's how. Like you asked the question earlier on, how does this keep on happening? That's how. We've been so completely othered. You hear the rhetoric at the moment in the news about trans people and non-binary people, and it's constant rhetoric of othering. That's what it is.
But Gillian, we were never humanised in the first place. That's it, isn't it?
The D part is
like we still have yet to be humanised.
So, just because I'm afraid of poets, they can be way more impressive than people think. I'm going to give them back their stage. But I just want to ask Kate, just if you have any thoughts to share on, because like one thing, as a neurodivergent and LGBTQ advocate myself, so like the queer community are kick-ass and resilient and radical and fairly brilliant, I think. But they couldn't get where we are today alone. So I was just kind of like that of what do we need so that we're not sitting here 10 years from now, 20 years from now telling the same story. What do we need the world to do? Not to ask you small questions. Like
Got
a minute and a half.
Well, I think similar to what you said about the LGBTQ, having allies really, and I think what will just be fantastic is to see parents getting on board and to see parents pushing back, yeah. Because when you see, the more I read about new ABA and sort of the attitudes, like just one thing I wrote down that I seen online was this sign that can be printed off for ABA therapists to use, and it's for planned ignoring, and it just says on the sign like, staff are currently ignoring a student's attention-seeking behaviour. Please do not give the student attention of any kind. And I feel like doesn't that just sum up?
Yeah.
It actually makes me feel sick.
Yeah, and like it just sums up the cruelness behind this therapy. I hate to use that word.
Yeah.
To maybe finish on a slightly lighter note. The whole thing's just like, did you feel the joy being sucked out of the room? But, I work as an early childhood educator, as Nem mentioned, but I also admin a number of groups for parents. Some for neurodivergent parents, some for non-neurodivergent, some for who've suddenly discovered that they are neurodivergent as they're on the groups. But been doing it for a few years. I've been in these spaces for quite a few years, and there is a change happening. There is parents pushing back. More and more we're getting parents joining our group, or I'm seeing people sharing stuff, sharing posts, sharing information, sharing blog posts, it is happening. It's glacial, but it is happening, and you're right. That's where the pushback has to happen, because people like Mackie must feel like screaming into the void for years about this. We're not autistic people. Unfortunately, as a marginalised group, like an awful lot of LGBTQI plus people, we don't have social power. So in terms of getting this message out and getting support behind it, we do need allies, we do need people to help. But the positive thing is I can definitely see that happening. It is happening. Probably not as fast as we'd all like it to, but it is happening. So even if it's you having a conversation with one or two people, it is having an impact. You don't have to go off, and speak to the doll and mention Logos and get blanked out of it. Sorry, I spoke to the Dual Autism committee, and you're not allowed to name people, and I went off on a rant about Logos, and they had to cut it all out, and it just was blind error. So yeah, I'm very annoyed with myself. You mentioned that.
Guidance
But
based
yeah, I
for
think
over 10
that's
years, that's fair
a
in
big
mind.
thing.
Yeah.
And just keep raising our voices keep making noise, and also kind of like I said, I work in both fields, and like Dublin Pride have given us this stage today to talk about this. There is allyship starting. There is like and even just like sometimes having one conversation with someone, and they go off and have a conversation with someone, and a conversation with someone, and then suddenly someone you've never met comes back to you and is like, I heard about this. What can I do?
And that's happened. That's
Yeah.
happened every time
Yeah.
you talk to somebody. Nem would have a lot of connections in. I keep on saying both communities, but Nem would have a lot. And they, like, people have overheard and be like, what are you talking about? Oh my god, no, that sounds exactly like
Yeah.
gay conversion therapy. And more the awareness is spreading. I'm 100% aware that we're going to get attacked.
We are attacked by poets, and that's my worst nightmare.
Because I just really want to say one thing, and I promise that's the end. I promise. I know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I still have to do my one just
Yeah,
one
no,
thing.
I know. But the other thing is, like, obviously, yes, we need allies, and we need people to be like grassroots, and we need individuals to take control and blah blah blah. But we also need like big agencies to stop shoving ABA down people's necks. Like, I learned about ABA as a student, as an OT student. I learned about ABA as a concept. It's taught in a lot of psychology degrees around the country.
Yeah.
It's pushed. Doctors, pediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists all say, "Oh, your child needs ABA," and parents go, "Well, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of anything else. So this must be the right choice." So that's the thing that needs to be broken down
There's
as well.
literally
And the professional
masters.
adult,
yeah.
There's masters.
Yeah, there's a masters in
yeah,
ABA.
in ABA.
Exhale.
So basically, ABA bad,
Gay
awesome
conversion.
cake great,
Yeah.
burn it all to the ground.
Yeah.